Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another set of notes. Today, we're going to talk about how bad things got during the Great Depression and the hero that comes along to save us, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Okay. Um, so, the first question we have to deal with is why was what Hoover was doing not working? Okay. Why was rugged individualism not working? And rugged individualism is that belief that Americans needed to be able to take care of themselves and depend on themselves and not the government. And the reason why that didn't work is because rugged individualism kind of depends on there being a traditional support system, places where people can go if they do need to get help. Those places traditionally throughout American history had been families, churches, and charities. If you need help, you went to your family, you went to your church, you went to a charity of some type. And during the Great Depression, those things really don't exist. Excuse me, I'm sorry. My son has left a mess in front of the computer. Okay. Those things don't really work well because those places have no money. Okay. You're going to see unemployment and homelessness increasing by insane amounts of people. And some of the only hope for these people are bread lines and soup kitchens. Places where you can go and you can get one loaf of bread a day to feed your family with. Or you can get a bowl of hot soup in the middle of the afternoon or for dinner at night. Something to warm you up. Now, the soup isn't like, it's more broth than soup, but it's something. You're also going to see a lot of shanty towns where people lose their homes and they can't afford to move and there's no family to move in with. So they end up kind of grabbing whatever scraps they can find to build a little shanty or shack out of, and they just build the shack in whatever spare space they can find. Central Park in New York City had a massive shanty town. Washington, D.C. had one. Chicago had one. Basically, any major city you're going to find, you're just going to have these like villages of homeless people. And then those are the homeless people that chose to stay in one spot. You're also going to have a large number of transients. Over 300,000 people just traveled that just moved constantly. They called them hobos in the 1920s, 1930s. Traditional hobos, we've seen them, they're the people who walk around, they have a stick with a bandana tied on the end with all their belongings inside the bandana. Hobos generally are known for jumping on and off trains. They'd wait for a train to leave the station and run alongside it and jump on, and that's how they would move from place to place. My husband's family, during the Great Depression, my husband's grandfather actually ended up. He was a transient, but he wasn't a hobo. He had a house and a family back home, but he became a transient worker. He became a migrant worker. And he traveled across the country just looking for odd jobs, and whatever money he could make, he sent back home to his family. So you're going to have a lot of men do that. This soup kitchen is actually really cool. It was opened up and run by Al Capone in Chicago. So, every morning you could line up and men could get a free cup of coffee. They could get a free donut in the morning if you were unemployed. In the afternoons you could line up and get a free cup of soup instead of coffee and a piece of bread. And for some people this is the only food they're gonna see. This billboard is left over from the 1920s. So it's world's highest standard of living. There's no way like the American way. This kind of quintessential 2.5 children family, right? 2 kids and a dog. Parents going on vacation somewhere, and we've got it better than everybody, right? That's very much a 1920s way of thinking. And here's a bread line in front of it. Okay, and it didn't matter how big your family was, you only got one loaf of bread. So, and that they didn't, you couldn't have you and your kids line up too, and all of you get a loaf of bread. It was one per group, and so it was rough. You have people who were actually wearing their resumes, right? Wanted a decent job. I'm a decent man. I'm 37 years old. I'm a war veteran. I'm from Chicago. I'm a native Chicagoan. I have experience with purchasing, accounting, and traffic. Please hire me, right? This is where you can contact me at. Right? I wanted a job. I'm a family man. I have a family. I'm 44 years old. I'm a veteran. Please, please, please hurry. I'll take any salary you can give me. NHA means I don't want a handout. No handouts. Don't just give me money. I want a job. I want to work for my money. You'll have cities who live near the railroad tracks where the people would jump off the train and go looking for a job. And they don't like those transient people coming into town because now there's more people in the town and the town can't support them. So you'll have cities put up signs like this near the railroads. Jobless men keep going. We can't take care of our own. Right? Like, don't even bother coming and looking for a job here. We don't have enough jobs for the people who live here. Y'all just need to keep on moving. You're going to see a lot of that. So these are transients, on the train, killing time while you're waiting. Okay. No, it is incredibly dangerous to jump on top of a train. It's borderline stupid. People lost limbs. If you trip and fell and you fell forward, you were going to get run over by the train and could lose a limb or you could die. So it's not an easy thing to do, and it's very, very dangerous. This is one of the quintessential pictures of the Great Depression for me. You've got homeless transients who are walking from town to town looking for a job. And you've got a leftover sign from the 1920s up against the highway. Next time, try the train. Relax, right? Next time, buy a ticket on the Southern Pacific Railroad, and you can be in luxury in the first class car, and you won't have to worry about driving all this way. No, they're not even driving. They can't afford a car. They can't afford gas, much less a train ticket. So it's very much shows what's going on in the Great Depression. You have people who were used to this kind of living high lifestyle, and they're brought low this way. So this is a kind of a supreme deluxe shantytown shack. Okay, mostly because it's got walls and windows and heat. It has chimneys. The mere fact that it has 2 chimneys tells me either there's 2 different families living in there and they both brought a stove with them, or these people, it looks to me like the women are taking in laundry and they're washing laundry for some people to earn some money. And you would usually have 2 stoves if you were a laundress because you would constantly need to keep water hot. You would constantly have hot water to be, washing. So this is kind of how the whole family's living. And I'm sure the family's bigger than just those 3. So like I said earlier, it could be very, very dangerous. So you have over, 300,000 who end up doing this, men and women. Now this is in Canada, but it's happening everywhere. Okay. All right. So right now, before you read what any of these are, I want you to stop, look at 3 of the symbols, and jot them down somewhere on the side of your notes. Do that right now. I'll pause the video. Okay, so hopefully I managed to get to the video and pause it on time. I want you to take a second, and we should have gone over in class what your 3 images were and what they meant. What these are, okay, these are transient symbols. Those men who survived by going from town to town and place to place, it's not always safe being homeless. One of the things that anyone who's thinking about going into law enforcement, if you've been in a criminal justice class, hopefully you've talked about this. Some of the most violent crimes committed against human beings are committed against homeless people. Homeless women are raped a lot. Homeless men are beaten a lot. And a lot of it is just they're powerless, right? There's no one to protect them. And because of that, you have to be kind of wary about what you do and who you go to for help. So these were symbols that homeless people would draw. They'd take a piece of chalk or a piece of charcoal, and they would draw these on the side of a barn or on a mailbox, but somewhere near someone's home, so that you would know going near the home what to expect when you got there. So, I've got a couple, a woman lives here, a kind woman lives here. The housewife will feed you if you do chores. They'll let you come inside and sit down and eat, give you food for work. They'll give you bread here. This place is good for a handout. This place, the people here are wealthy. Okay. The beginning of text speech, I ate, right? They'll let you eat here. They're okay. This guy's an easy mark, right? They're easy to con out of money. This place, you need to tell a pitiful story here, tell a hard luck story. They have work available here. Pretend you're sick. They'll let you sleep in the barn. That's a big one, especially in the winter when it starts to get cold. There's a good chance to get money here. They'll help you if you're sick. There's a doctor that lives here. There's a police officer that lives here. There's a judge that lives here. This person's dishonest, which means they probably said, if you do this work for me, I'll pay you, and then they never paid them. Bad-tempered owner, the person who lives here is poor. They have a telephone, which is a big deal, especially if you were like my husband's grandfather and you were working far away from your family. A lot of times they would let you use the telephone to call. This is before long-distance charges. So they'd let you use the telephone to call back home so you could talk to your family. Man with a gun, always good to know if you're approaching someone's house. Dog, bad dog, there is a good distinction there. So, no one lives here, the owner's home, the owner's out, okay? These are all different symbols, and you'll find a lot of homeless people still use symbols like these today. Now, each area has its own symbols, but a lot of homeless people, there is still homeless graffiti that's used to tell people what to do and what not to do. So like I said, this is the traditional type hobo, where you've got your sack on a stick, right? Because it's easier to carry the stick. Plus, the stick can be used as defense against someone trying to rob you or an animal of some type. So that's always good to have. One of the things that's always interested me is a lot of these people who are homeless, they have college degrees, right? These are people who were doing well. They had, money in the stock market and they just lost everything. So a lot of these people are going to understand the value of an education. A lot of these people understand that if their children are ever going to have a chance of not living in a tent in a shanty town, they're going to have to know at least how to read and write. And so what you see here is this man is actually going over math with his kid in the dirt. They can't afford paper and pencil, so they scratch it out in the dirt. And that's how they practice. So, I mean, it's as a teacher, that one always kind of gets me in the feels. Now, because Hoover's policies don't really do anything to bring relief to the working class, the Republican Party came to be seen as the party of the wealthy. So you should remember from the previous set of notes that Hoover believed in that trickle-down economics, that indirect aid. You give money to businesses, and businesses are supposed to use that money to grow and hire more employees, which would then give those employees new wages. The problem is businesses don't do that, especially if they're afraid about going bankrupt. If they're afraid of going bankrupt, they're not going to take that money and grow. They're going to take that money and stretch it as far as they can so they don't go bankrupt. So indirect aid does not work. Trickle-down economics does not work. It has never worked in the history of America. And it's still a thing people think we should do. Today, our version of trickle-down economics, it's not giving money to businesses, it's giving businesses tax cuts. We expect that if you give businesses tax cuts, those businesses will then create more jobs because they've got more money to work with. And it doesn't always work that way. Now, some businesses do that, but not all. Okay? And because what Hoover didn't help individual people, they start to think that the Republican Party's not helping them. Now, Hoover, to be fair, what Hoover did keep the Great Depression from getting worse. It just didn't make anything better for individual people. So individual people, they're seeing things like the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. They're seeing things like that, and they're thinking, "Oh, wait, what? Insurance companies, banks, the government's giving them money, and they can't give me enough money so that I can buy food for my family? Wait, what's this rugged individualism stuff about? Why do I have to do it all on my own, and you're helping the rich businessmen?" Okay, so that they start to think, well, the Republican Party is just about helping the rich businessmen. They're not about helping the poor people. American voters are going to start to blame the Great Depression on Hoover, because he happened to be president when this all went down. So you're going to have a lot of horrible things from the Great Depression named after Hoover. You have Hoovervilles, which are those shanty towns of the homeless people. You have Hoover blankets, which were newspapers, because newspapers are still working. And turns out the next day, yesterday's newspaper isn't worth anything. So they would just leave stacks of them out in the dump, and homeless people would grab them, and they would use those for blankets because it's better than nothing. People would make pads on the ground of newspapers and lay on the newspapers so that you're not laying directly on the cold ground, and it would try to be able to keep some of your body heat from releasing into the ground. Hoover flags, a way of showing your disdain for the president, was to fly a Hoover flag. And the way you flew that flag was you would turn your pockets inside out to prove you had no money. Okay. A Hoover hog, okay, was different depending on where you lived. It was pretty much any random animal you could kill and eat. Okay. In the West, you're going to see, jackrabbits, armadillos. Around here, you're going to see possums, raccoons. In bigger cities, you're going to see things like squirrel. Okay. So basically, anything you can manage to kill will become a Hoover hog. By the way, does anybody know the problem with eating armadillos? Do you guys know what the disease the armadillos carry is? I wonder if anybody answered it. Armadillos carry leprosy. So if you eat armadillo, you stand a high chance of getting leprosy. So this is one of the larger shanty towns. Okay, so this is what you're going to see. Notice there's not really any rhyme or reason to it. There's not really any rows. You just kind of build wherever you can find a spot. Okay. Hoover's Poor Farm Tobacco Fund. Right, hard times are still hoovering over us. Right, this is basically just people asking for a handout. Okay, put money in here. We'll buy tobacco and then we'll share it with everybody who put money in. People using Hoover blankets. Okay, those newspapers. Hoover flags. Your pockets turned inside out. We can sleep under newspapers called Hoover blankets. Look at my Hoover flags. I have nothing in my pockets. I've lost my home because I couldn't pay my mortgage because of the stock market crash, so he's homeless. Now we live in these rundown shacks called Hoovervilles. We're calling them Hoovervilles because Hoover is doing nothing to help with the Great Depression. Okay. That's an armadillo. That's what people are eating. How desperate do you have to be to look at that and be like, I'll eat it? I mean, seriously, nothing about that looks appetizing. Ugh, no. All right, and then here's a 1932 campaign flag from the 1932 presidential campaign. If you like the Depression and want more, vote for Hoover. Right, so this one's obviously a pro-FDR campaign flag. Okay. Democrats, in response to the Depression, are going to start to shift away from the traditional economic policies. Instead of going back to laissez-faire, instead of going back to those trickle-down economics, which is what the country has used since the beginning of time in this country, Democrats are going to say, you know what, this is not working. And because it's not working, we're going to have to do something different. And the leader of that change in the Democratic Party was the governor of New York. He was a reforming governor. His name was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. We call him FDR. And yes, it is Delano, not Delano. I don't know where you guys got the idea of Delano. It's Delano. Okay. he proposed a brand new plan. He called it the New Deal for the common man. So this is going to be a new way of doing things for normal people, right? He wants to put in place things that will help the normal everyday working Joe, not businesses. And what he proposed was a program of direct aid. So instead of the government giving money to businesses, hoping the businesses will create jobs, the government will use direct aid and just create jobs itself. So the government would create jobs. And those jobs would give people a salary, and that salary would then be spent on things, and that would work to pump prime the economy. Um, if Has anyone ever used one of those pumps, the water pumps? Okay, hopefully someone in there has. If you haven't, there's a problem with the old-fashioned water pumps. If you don't use them for a while, they act like they've dried out even though they haven't. You could pump for a week and not get any water out of it. Because the way it works... Okay, this will work. Okay. Excuse the soda on my straw. Okay, here's the straw for my drink. Okay, imagine this is the pipe in a pump. Okay, so you've got the water down here at the bottom and the handle up here at the top. Inside the pipe, there'll be a little flap of leather. Okay, and it's just on a little rotating, twisty handle. And the way it's supposed to work is the leather fills up the pipe completely so that whenever you pump the handle, you're actually rotating that leather. And because it fills up the pipe completely, the spinning creates a vacuum inside the pipe and will pull the water up. Okay? The problem is when leather gets dry, it shrinks. Okay? Let me rephrase that. When leather gets wet and then dries out, it shrinks. One of the reasons why O.J. Simpson got away with it, he was wearing leather gloves and they were covered in blood, so they got wet. And so by the time they dried out, they had shrunk. So whenever he's trying to try that glove on over another surgical glove, it's not going to fit. It never would have. So, they lived in California. They didn't know about shoveling snow in leather gloves, but same idea. So with that piece of leather inside the pump can dry out occasionally. And you could pump and pump and pump as much as you wanted to, but it's not going to be big enough to fill up the pipe and create that vacuum. So you would have to do something called priming the pump. You would have to take a little bit of water and pour the water back into the pump. Pour the water back into the pipe and pour enough water in there to wet that piece of leather again. So if you wet that piece of leather, it would then expand because it's wet. It would fill up the pump and you could pump in as much water as you wanted to could come out, right? So you put some water into the pump to get a lot of water out. And that was his plan. We're going to create jobs. We're going to put money into the economy. And by creating jobs with our money, those people will then spend their salaries. Businesses will make money. Demand will go up because people are actually spending money. And because demand's going up, production will go up and business will have to hire more people, which will create more salaries. So you're creating jobs to get jobs. You're creating salaries so more people get salaries. You are pump priming the economy. Now, because the Democratic Party offered direct relief and help, offered programs that would help directly the poor people, FDR's Democratic Party comes to be seen as the party of the working class. Okay. So this is FDR. Okay. Side note, he married someone he was related to. This is his wife, Eleanor. Now, they were like very distant cousins. Like we're talking 5th, 6th, 7th. I can't remember the exact number, but they are very distant cousins. He was a very distant cousin of Theodore Roosevelt, the previous president. And she is Theodore Roosevelt's niece. Okay. Although I always felt a little bit icky because her name was already Roosevelt. So when she got married, she didn't have to change her last name. Icky. Okay. So interesting side note about FDR, you will almost never see a picture of him in his wheelchair. Okay. As a matter of fact, I saw footage when I was in college of FDR getting off a boat after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. whenever he went to Pearl Harbor, and all you can see is the top of his hat and the handle of his wheelchair. He was that surrounded by people, so people would not see him in his wheelchair. Most Americans had no clue he was in a wheelchair. And that tells you kind of the integrity reporters had at the time, because reporters did know. And reporters didn't do anything to talk about that. Reporters didn't out it. They didn't talk about him being in a wheelchair or him being an invalid. They just allowed him to be a president. Now, a lot of times when you see a picture of him, he'll be leaning up against something like a car, like he is in this photo, or he'll be holding on to people like he is in this photo. He had tremendous upper body strength, but he had polio as a child, and it wasn't really bad, but it gave him complications the older he got. So whenever he was younger, he could still walk, he could still stand. But the older he got, the more pain he had, and it's just his legs didn't work as much. His muscles started to atrophy. He did have a set of braces he would wear on his legs. They weren't like super strong Forrest Gump type braces, but these were braces that would keep his legs from wobbling on him. They basically forced his knees to lock. And they provided a little bit of support, but not much. So you'll see him give speeches, and he'll be holding onto the podium, and like all of his body weight is on his arms. He had a pool installed at the White House because his exercise every day was swimming. Because when you go swimming, your legs can just float, and he would use his arms to propel himself through the pool. All right, so FDR and direct aid. The way aid works. Okay, you have corporations and banks down here at the bottom, and the people and voters up here. And government aid and help was given to the people. The government created jobs. These people got paid for doing the jobs. And then they took their wages and they spent the money. And that's how the corporations and banks got money. They got it through profit by selling people things. And that makes demand go up. Okay? The problem with indirect aid, when you give businesses money, you're not making demand go up. When you give businesses the money, people still aren't spending. And if people aren't spending, they don't have any incentive to start creating more and hiring more people. So that's the flaw in indirect aid. You kind of expect businesses to go ahead and take it upon themselves to up production and hire more people, and then hope that later demand will go up. And most businesses won't do that. So businesses get that profit. This is a group of men cheering the fact that FDR just won the presidency. Okay, we'll get there. 1932, the election is there, and Hoover is running for a second term with the slogan, "Prosperity is just around the corner." Okay? Just stay with me. I promise things are about to get better. It's just, you can't see it, but it's just around the corner. Things are going to get so much better. Okay? And this is kind of like the way people felt about that. Right? You've got the way to prosperity. Hire, fire, save, spend, be cautious, be reckless. It's just around the corner. Okay? So by this point, they were so sick of Hoover, he could have told them the sky was blue, and they'd call him a bald-faced liar. Okay? Summer 1932, you have the Bonus Army's March on Washington. Okay? The Bonus Army was made up of unemployed Great War veterans. These are men who had fought in World War I. And Congress promised them what we call combat pay today. They were promised a service bonus for fighting in an active war. But they weren't supposed to get that money until 1945. So the war ended in 1918, and they were supposed to take them a while, and it would. They had to go through by hand each individual soldier's record, add up the amount of time they spent in combat, figure out where the combat was, how dangerous it was for them, what position they served in that battle, how dangerous that position was, and there was a different level of bonus they got for each thing. So somebody had to go through one person's record and figure out every battle they were in, and figure out how much bonus that one person was due. And they had to do that for every soldier in World War One. And then the government had to figure out this is the amount of money we have to spend, and then the government had to have time to raise that amount of money to do it. So they were supposed to get their bonuses in 1945. But Great Depression happens, and people are losing their farms, they're losing their homes, they can't feed their family. And they know that the government owes them this money. So you have a lot of Great War veterans who join this bonus march to Washington, demanding that they go ahead and get paid the bonus. The government's supposed to give them that money. The government needs to do that now. And they do pass a bill. They pass a bill called the Patman Bill, Congress does, which said we're going to give the bonus immediately. Okay. Now, here's the thing. All revenue bills, all bills that have to do with taxes or spending, have to start in the House of Representatives. So the House passes this bill, but Senate has to approve it. And the Senate looks at how much this is going to cost us and looks at the amount of money that we have, and the Senate has to say no. We can't afford to pay it. There's no other option. The Senate had to say no to this bill. If they had said yes, we would have been as desperate as Germany. So most of the veterans, when they're told no, they go back home. Okay, here's the thing about the Veterans March. Okay, veterans most of the time are incredibly proud of their service. Okay, they're proud of the things they did for their country. They're proud of their country. They love their country. So even when they were protesting, they weren't doing it violently, right? This was a peaceful protest. This was they came in numbers to show how desperate they were, not to show how angry they were. So most of the veterans and their families are going to go back home, but a lot of the veterans and the families don't have money to go back home or don't have a home to go back to. So they are going to set up their own Hooverville in Washington, D.C. Keep in mind, this is an election year, and there is now a camp of homeless World War I veterans in front of the White House. So this obviously does not look good for Hoover as he's running around the country trying to get himself reelected. So Hoover orders the removal of this bonus army. And I don't think he thought that it would be as bad as it was. The problem is he told a general to get rid of them. And generals are very literal. You say, I want them gone, generals get them gone. They don't worry about being nice about it. The guy tasked with kicking out all of these homeless veterans is General Douglas MacArthur. Okay, you'll see him again in World War One, and again in Korea, but we'll get there. MacArthur is going to use violence against these homeless war vets. He's going to use smoke bombs. He's going to set shanties on fire. He's going to use water cannons. Anything he can think of to force the people to leave. He figures if you destroy the shacks they're living in, they have nothing left to stay for, and they'll just disperse. And this is covered in newspapers. The whole country finds out about what's going on. And this all becomes evidence to normal citizens of what they see as Hoover's heartlessness. So all these pictures and stuff I'm going to show you, they were published in newspapers. So people saw what Hoover had ordered done to these homeless war veterans, and they think of it as Hoover just doesn't have a heart. How can you do this to people who fought and bled for our country? Okay. So these are the women who are actually computing how much each person gets. Now they are going to be at this for years and years and years before they finish. But each woman, you'll see, she's got the person's file in her lap. And this is a calculator. I know it's huge and it looks like a typewriter. It's an adding machine. Okay. So this is them adding up, figuring out how much bonus that man is supposed to get. This is a VFW post, a part of the bonus army from Chattanooga, Tennessee, coming in. Okay. One of the things you'll notice, it's integrated. Okay. Because at this point, when you're that desperate, you'll take all the vets you can get, black, white, whatever. More bodies are more bodies. Okay. So this is one of the rallies they had outside the Capitol building trying to get the Patman bill passed. And ironically enough, a government organization who never takes sides. There are very few parts of the government that are not obviously Democratic or obviously Republican. And one of those that has stayed neutral almost all the time is the post office, right? The post office is a government entity, and they don't usually take sides in politics. They can't afford to. But the post office took sides in this. Okay, the post office actually issued a stamp that said "pay the bonus," and if you were writing a letter to your congressman, you could get that stamp put on it for free. Okay, so that they actually, they took, what's the word I'm looking for? They took the initiative here to say that we support these veterans getting their bonus money. Okay. So this is the Hooverville in Washington, D.C. And you'll notice it looks quite different from the previous ones I've shown you. For one, everything's in straight lines, right? And for two, the men are all flying their service flags. If you serve in the U.S. military, you are given a service flag. You're given a flag as a thank you for your service. And these are things that people are proud of, right? My father-in-law's got his mounted. He's got his in one of the flag boxes on his mantle. But this is something you're proud of. This is something you don't ever do anything bad to. So you've got these men who've been through boot camp. They know how to set up a camp. So this is one of the cleanest, nicest shanty towns you're going to be able to find because it has latrines dug. It has a water drainage system, so that they have set this up like it is a military camp. So it's a lot more orderly, a lot less crime, a lot more family friendly. And this is what Hoover orders removed. Okay. So you'll see, once again, everything's orderly. Okay. As orderly as it can be whenever your whole life's in a tent, but it's orderly. Okay. You'll see they had a parking lot, so you parked your cars. You didn't have cars up near where the houses are. Okay. And this is MacArthur and some of his troops. He used the National Guard. He didn't use the military to try to rout out some of the soldiers. And what always gets me, right? What always gets me right in the feels, you have this cop trying to tackle this veteran. And all this veteran is trying to do is keep his service flag from hitting the ground. Because if a flag hits the ground, you have to retire it. Which means you have to fold it up, you have to bring it to a military base, or to a VFW post where military personnel will do it, and it has to be cremated. And he doesn't want to lose his service flag. Okay? So that's the type of respect these men had for our country. They're not thumbing their nose at the country. They love their country. They were just asking for money that was already promised to them. They just wanted it a little early. Okay? So this is MacArthur, rather. Okay, and you see the Capitol building in the background. You see the smoke from where he set fires and released smoke bombs. Okay? And you've got the soldiers wearing gas masks trying to rout all the people out of the shantytown. Here's the shantytown's on fire with the Capitol in the background. Here's the fire with the Washington Monument in the background. In 1932, FDR is going to win easily. Like, hands down, he wins. We're talking landslide. And Democrats win control of both houses of Congress. So there's a Democrat in the White House, Democrats have control of the Senate, and Democrats have control of the House of Representatives. Which means FDR can go in there and he can get stuff done. This is FDR giving his inaugural address, which we'll read some of today. January 1933, Hitler becomes Chancellor of Germany. He became dictator. He was given the title of Der Führer, which means leader, in 1934. So 1933, he's elected chancellor. Later that year, they elect him chancellor for life, which means he's going to be president forever. And by 1934, Germany has decided they like Hitler so much they're giving up on this democracy thing altogether. They voted to make him emperor or dictator. March of 1933, Germany opens its first concentration camp. It was called Dachau. Okay. This is not an extermination camp. They are not, there's no, gas chambers in this one. This is just concentration camp. So here is Hitler. This is the previous Kaiser. This is Kaiser Wilhelm shaking Hitler's hand. Here's Hitler giving one of his famous speeches that we're going to read a little bit of at the beginning of World War II notes. This is Dachau. It looks a lot like a military barracks. Okay. All right, so kind of an evil thing that they did on the gates to all of the concentration camps and extermination camps. They put these words on all the gates. Albrecht macht frei. Okay. Albrecht macht frei. I'm probably butchering it, but it means work will set you free. They told Jewish people that when they came into these camps, that if you worked hard enough and you proved yourself a good, loyal German citizen, you would get to go home. So people were working themselves to death trying to prove they were good, loyal German citizens so that they could get sent back home. And of course, obviously, that was never going to happen. March 4th, so the same month that Hitler opens Dachau, FDR is inaugurated. He is the last president inaugurated on the March 4th date because of the 20th Amendment. They hated Hoover so much they tried to pass an amendment so FDR could get sworn in earlier. It's not going to happen. They don't get it passed in time. But they changed the inauguration date to January 20th. I remember it, 20th Amendment. The new date is January 20th. And what this does is it shortens the lame duck period. A lame duck is a president who is currently president but has already been voted out of office. Okay? So if the election's in November and Hoover lost, he is considered a lame duck president until March 4th when FDR gets sworn in. Because there's no point. He can't get anything done because Congress knows, the Democrats in Congress know, all they have to do is hold on long enough and a Democrat will be president. Okay? In Obama's lame duck period. Okay, well, it wasn't actually a lame duck period. It was his whole last year. But Obama had tried to put in a Supreme Court justice. And the Republicans stalled for a full year until there was a Republican president who could put forth somebody else. Later on that same year, the 21st Amendment's going to be passed. It repealed prohibition. Okay. Basically, people decided we need all the industry we can get, including the booze industry. If we allow booze to be made, maybe the refineries will open back up and they can hire some people. On top of that, prohibition just wasn't working. The government was spending, millions of dollars a year trying to enforce it, and their enforcement leaked like a sieve. People got booze through everywhere. Now, the 21st Amendment, this is the only time an amendment has ever been repealed. And this ends the idea of the noble experiment. It ends all chances of prohibition in America forever. FDR, his inaugural speech, he says, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And so he's saying, guys, all we have to do is not panic. By panicking, we make things worse. So you need to be calm. And one of the very first things he does is deal with the biggest problem of the time. And the biggest problem was that banks were going under like that. The bank panic, people were still pulling all their money out of the banks. Banks were failing left and right. So he has to stop that. He has to get people to stop panicking. So FDR declares what he called a bank holiday, and it closed all U.S. banks for a couple of days. And during those couple of days, he gave a radio address. So he taped, or recorded, I should say, a speech. He called these his fireside chats to reassure Americans. And what's really interesting about these is, yes, they're very well written and he's very well spoken, but it doesn't sound like he's giving a speech to Congress. It sounds like he's sitting down with you in your living room, just talking to you, just telling you, like, look, I know you're worried about this. I'm worried too, but there's nothing we can't do if we stick together. So what I am asking you as your president to do is to put your trust in me, and to understand that we know what we're doing and your banks are safe. The only thing that's going to make your banks fail is if you keep panicking and pulling your money out. If you can trust in me, put your trust in me, I promise you your banks won't fail. And they broadcast this radio address at different times of the day, all through that bank holiday. And when banks reopened, the panic had stopped. That doesn't mean people are bringing their money back into the banks, but it does mean that the people who had their money in the banks decided to leave their money there. They put their trust in FDR whenever he asked them to. And FDR is going to learn that this fireside chat method, where you're sitting down and you're talking directly to the citizens, that's going to work really well for him. People like him, they trust him, and they're willing, for the most part, to do what he says needs to be done. So this is FDR actually recording one of his fireside chats. If you've ever been to the Children's Museum in Oak Ridge, they have one of these old style radios, and you can press a play button on it, and it actually plays FDR's speech to Congress after Pearl Harbor, so you can actually hear what he sounds like. Now, small problem. FDR had promised that New Deal for the common man, and he knew kind of what he wanted to get done, but as far as an actual plan of how to do it, he had no idea how that was going to get done. But FDR was smart enough to understand that he didn't have to come up with everything on his own. He didn't have to know everything. So he called in what he called a brain trust. So if a trust is a monopoly, if a trust is a monopoly or a control of all of one thing, he was trying to get all of these smartest people in America to come and work for him and help him come up with advice on how to deal with things. His top 3 advisors are going to be working on what he called the 3 R's. You need to know these: relief, recovery, and reform. Okay? So all the laws he wants to get passed are going to fall into one of those. Finding some way to bring immediate relief. Finding some way to help people feel better right now. Recovery. Finding a way to get the government to bounce back, to end the depression and to start making things better. And reform. Passing laws that will regulate businesses and will keep something like this from ever happening again. Okay, so bring immediate relief to people, find a way to help the economy recover from this depression, and find a way to pass reforms that will keep this from ever happening again. Those are his 3 R's of the New Deal. And his 3 biggest advisors are Harry Hopkins, Harold Ickes, and his closest advisor, which most people didn't know of at the time, was his wife, Eleanor. She was actually a very smart woman, and she was kind of raised at the knee of Theodore Roosevelt. So she understood what a president could do. She understood the amount of power a president could exert on the people. And she's going to give him some really good advice. So, here is Harold Ickes and Harry Hopkins, and there's Eleanor Roosevelt. Now, FDR, first things first, is he's going to call a special session of Congress It's now known as the 100 Days Congress to create a New Deal programs. It's called the 100 Days Congress because Congress was in session for 100 days without adjourning and going home. And that's very rare. Like, if we can get Congress today to work 100 days a year, we've done something good. Okay? Congress takes more vacations than almost everybody I know. Like, they go home for the year. They go home in, like, November. Most times, if they don't shut down the government. They'll go home in November and they'll come back January when they're swearing in the new people. So, like, that'd be great, right? Just take months off at a time. Plus, they take a adjournment in the summer where they take long breaks. Okay. So FDR calls this. He says, "You're going to come back to Congress. You're going to stay here till we get things done." And Republicans are actually going to cooperate. They're going to start saying, "Okay, sure, we'll pass this." And it's really interesting why. It's not that they agree with these programs. It's that there was an actual fear of violence. They were afraid they would get hurt if they didn't. So there was afraid angry mobs would storm them. So that they do go along at first, and then they eventually start to fight back. Okay, and that is it for this section. Tomorrow we will talk about specific New Deal programs.